O Lord, help us to see you more clearly, to love you more dearly, to follow you more nearly, day by day. Amen. Please sit. I'm going to tell you a story today about a group of refugees, about a people who were persecuted because of their beliefs, because where they're from, about leaders who are more interested in staying in power and holding on to their grip of power than they are in governing people justly. And if anyone were concerned at this time, if we're weighing too much into getting political in the church, I would point out that what I'm referring to today is the setting of our gospel story in Matthew today. I would argue that the Gospel of Matthew is laying out the case on this day that rather than straying away from politics in the church, that being a disciple of Jesus Christ is an inherently, fundamentally political statement. And I would grant that many of us, myself included, have certainly said from time to time there should be no place for politics in the church, but I rather think that what most of the time we mean by that is that there's no place for partisanship in the church. There's no place for partisan politics where we're more interested in getting our way and winning than we are in trying to find a way to care for one another rightly and justly. We're more interested in being confronted with those we disagree with, marking them as our enemies and discounting them as being evil or wrong. And I would agree that while there is no place, I think, in this church for that kind of partisanship that divides us and closes doors, that I think Matthew makes the case today, and will make the case through the entirety of the Gospel of Matthew, that being a Christian in this world is inherently a political decision. We are at the start of what will be a year of studying the Gospel according to Matthew. And Matthew chapter 2 is one of the most important early parts of that gospel because it sets the tone, it sets the context that will be the through line for this entire way of understanding Jesus. It starts with Christmas. It starts with Christmas, which is fitting for today because we are still in, I think, the 11th day of Christmas. So it's still valid, as the song goes, on the 11th day of Christmas, my preacher gave to me a sermon about Jesus Christ. And as we hear the Christmas story, I am very mindful of growing up. Growing up, I listened to a lot of John Denver. And I remember one of John Denver's Christmas songs that I did not understand at the time became fundamental to my understanding of what Christmas is about. It was his rendition of Mary's Little Boy Child. Hark the herald angels sing, a new king is born today, and man shall live forevermore because of Christmas Day. A new king is born today. I found that sweet and comforting and reassuring. But you know who would not have found that sentiment of a new king being born today sweet and comforting would have been King Herod. King Herod, who in the first century Judea, of the Judean people under the occupation of the Roman Empire, led by the vassal King Herod, who the people hadn't chosen, didn't want as their leader, ruled outright and ruled in such a way as to make sure that he preserved his power at utmost. Whether it meant crushing people or even killing people along the way to preserve his power, he would do what he needed to do. And it's in that context, ruling over the people, that Matthew tells the story of a new king being born, a threat to Herod's power. Matthew chapter 2 then systematically, like a keen observer of the law, we'll call him Matthew the lawyer in this case, lays out his legal arguments for why Jesus is the rightful and just king. And he lays them out, 3 arguments, Exhibit A, Exhibit B, Exhibit C, and leaves us to make our determination. The wise men are called to Herod to help him identify where this new threat to his power is, this new king, and demands their obedience, their loyalty. Their obedience is a sign of their loyalty. And the wise men go and they find Jesus and are confronted with a choice. Are they going to remain loyal to Herod, even to the death of this child? And they make a decision. They make a decision in that moment to change sides, to change their loyalty to this new king, this baby. What a radical move on their part to change their allegiance to this new king and to go home by a different road instead of turning him in to Herod. This sets the stage in Matthew chapter 2, where we pick up, and it says that they had left. The they in that story is the wise men at the beginning of this gospel. And Herod is enraged at this disloyalty. Herod is enraged at this new king, and it's dangerous. And so the angel of the Lord appears to Joseph. This is not the first time the angel of the Lord appeared to Joseph. He had appeared once earlier to Joseph in a dream to tell him when Mary was pregnant not to cast her out or to reject her as being an unwed mother, but to show compassion upon her, to take care of her, which Joseph agreed to do. Now this time the angel of the Lord appears to Joseph and warns them that they're in danger and they need to flee for their lives. And so they go into exile. They go into Egypt as refugees, into a foreign land, hoping for acceptance, for someone to welcome them, for someone to take care of them. Let it not be lost on us that going into Egypt for the Hebrew people would have meant this is the land where they had been enslaved. Going into Egypt, where Joseph would then have to look for some sort of gainful way to support his family, a safe place for his young child to be raised, looking upon the mercy of those who would look past that they are people from a foreign land and from another religion, and to welcome them and show them hospitality. And they found in Egypt a home. This is Exhibit A for Matthew the lawyer, Exhibit A that says that the prophets had said that the king, the true king would come from Egypt. Exhibit B is not in our gospel reading for today. If you'll look in the gospel, you'll see there's actually a section that is cut out of the gospel, not by us. It's a section that in the election appointed for the day, that middle part is missing. But since it's the second of Matthew's 3 points, I think you need to be aware of what happens there. Herod, in his great outrage, decides to murder every boy under the age of 2 in the land to try to get to Jesus. This is touching on what the prophets had foretold, the prophets who had acknowledged a great loss of a generation of people, but that loss would not mean the promise. God's promise for the people of Israel was over. That God's promise would be alive for them. This told by the prophet Jeremiah, that's in the very verse. It's actually one verse after where we ended the Jeremiah reading, because that was cut out too. But second point of Matthew was that while a generation may have been lost to the people of Israel, it did not mean the end of their story, that their king, their true king, would be there to save them. Exhibit 3 from Matthew. Exhibit C from Matthew is when Herod fails to find Jesus and to kill this threat to his power. Herod dies, and the angel of the Lord appears to Joseph yet again, a third time. The first time to tell him to take care of Mary, to be compassionate to her. The second time to warn them of the danger. The third time to say that Herod has died and it is time for the king to return home. When Joseph brings Mary and Jesus back to their home, it is still not safe at this time, however, because a new ruler has taken Herod's place, the son taken over in hereditary succession, Archelaus, who is as oppressive, possibly more oppressive than Herod himself was. Thousands upon thousands of people of Judea oppressed or killed because of trying to do things like be able to assemble, to try to practice freedom of speech, to practice their religion. And anyone who was a threat to Archelaus' power was silenced or killed for it. And it's in that context that Jesus is brought back home. Joseph, wisely probably, decides not to set up in Tiberias or Sepphoris or one of the large cities of the Galilee, but instead to settle out into the rural countryside, away from the city, out into the town of Nazareth. And Matthew, the lawyer, points out, Exhibit C, the prophets tell that the king, the true king, will come from Nazareth. Matthew, in chapter 2, has systematically laid out points A, B, and C, proof of who the rightful king is. Matthew says, case closed. He rests his case and then leaves it to us for the rest of the Gospel of Matthew that we will be hearing for the rest of this year, leaves it to us to decide if we are going to follow Jesus as our true king. What kind of king will that be? Jesus is not the kind of king like Herod or Archelaus who will rule by the sword or through fear or oppression, by demanding obedience as a sign of loyalty. What kind of king will Jesus be in this story? According to Matthew, the kind of king Jesus is fundamentally a teacher. Fundamentally somebody who never fails at an opportunity to go and help people to grow and to learn. Jesus takes every opportunity at every parable in this gospel to teach people how to live, and when they don't understand, he stops and he works with them and he helps them to understand by explaining it to them. He never fails at any opportunity, at a healing miracle, to stop and use it as a teaching moment to talk about the importance of caring for those who are ill or injured. He never fails at an opportunity when those are at a feeding miracle to teach about the importance of taking of what you have to feed those around you in need. He doesn't fail at the opportunity when he's betrayed, even betrayed by his closest associates, to use it as a teaching opportunity for forgiveness. He doesn't even fail at his death on the cross to take advantage of it as an opportunity to teach about life, about the promise of life. Again and again and again, Jesus, as the King, chooses to teach us, to lead us, and does the thing that Herod and Archelaus were probably the most afraid of, which was to share his power abundantly. Rather than holding on to it and hoarding it to himself out of fear of not being the one in control, Jesus then gives it to his disciples to say, I share this power with you. You now go out and you heal as I have healed. You feed as I have fed others. You go out and you teach others as I have taught you. Jesus in the Gospel of Matthew is the one who holds up the young child and says those who are willing to accept it with innocence, as this young child can accept the kingdom of heaven. He points to those who are the least of us, the cold, the hungry, those in the imprisoned, and says, the way you care for this person is the way you care for me. This is the Jesus who remembers what it's like. His life is informed by remembering what it's like to have come from an unwed mother who the angels said to have compassion upon. The Jesus who knows what it's like to have been exiled into a foreign land and to need the hospitality of strangers. The Jesus who knows what it's like to be persecuted for who he is and what he believes, and to instead use it as a tool for compassion for others. Every step of the way in the story of Matthew informs the kind of king that Jesus will be for us. And if we then are going to choose to have him be our ruler, our king, that is an intensely political choice. To decide to be subjects of a king not because of fear, but because of faith. And to go out and to be those kind of people that Jesus calls his subjects to be. To go out and to feed, to heal, to be compassionate, to be loving, to be forgiving. And in the face of all things that Jesus was put through, to decide not to react with vengeance and to not to teach us about reacting in vengeance, but decided to open up his heart to all of us and to make the political decision to be a disciple of Jesus Christ in this day and this age is about deciding to open up our hearts in that same way. The same way that the Gospel of Matthew portrayed Jesus as our teacher, our healer, our king, the one true king. Thanks be to God.